Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Vazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Egg Whisperer Show. This show is kind of special to me and I'll tell you why. About 3 years ago, I started something called Egg Freezing Party, and I want to tell a little bit about the history about that because I think it's kind of cool. So before I get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about who I am. I feel like I should be a rapper, Dramey. A lot of people think that that's my name when I spell out my email address, dramey@dramey.org. That is my email address. And I also talk about FSH, AMH, estradiol, AFC. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to learn about tonight. So we're going to do a little fertility lesson from a fertility doctor. My sister teases me all the time, and sometimes she trolls me on this show. And she says, Amy, you went to school for 15 years just to figure out an egg and sperm make a baby. And I say, yes, indeed, I did that. So I love what I do. I can talk about fertility every day, all day long. And I want to teach you or tell you why I started Egg Freezing Party. So take a look at this post on Facebook. I get these requests all the time. It says here, I'm co-hosting an essential oils and mimosas party. If you want an invite, let me know. So I love my friends. I love hanging out with my friends. But when I go to their home shopping parties, it often turns into a fertility awareness party. And so one night I came home and I said, you know what? I wonder if there's a URL I can get called Egg Freezing Party, and sure enough it was available, and now the rest is history. So I'm on a fertility awareness campaign trying to teach women how to track their fertility levels over time, how to protect their fertility, and teach them about the egg freezing process. Because more people nowadays know that you can get your boobs done than know that you can get your eggs frozen. What? I just said that. Totally. So if the same number of people know that you can get your eggs frozen and track your fertility level over time, if people know that, then I'm going to stop throwing these parties. But until then, the party goes on. And just as a funny ha-ha, my best girlfriend sent this to me this weekend. They said, let's do, what did they say? I just bought this, let's have a mask and drinks party, all in one facial. And then, of course, I said, OMG, that looks like fertility meds. And they said, this sounds fun, it's supposed to tighten your face in a crazy way. And I have a feeling you can probably guess what I said as a response. And what I said was, in the vagina. And they all thought that was funny. But basically, I can turn anything into a fertility awareness party, or what I call an egg freezing party. So over the past 3 years, I've been all over the country, even world, throwing these parties from Seattle with my friends over at Pacific Northwest Fertility, down in Los Angeles with my friend Catherine De Ugarte. And it's been an absolute blast. So whenever people ask me to throw a party for them, I say, let's get started, and I'm happy to throw one. Because ultimately, I want to get ahead of infertility. Infertility is one of those things that I'd like to think of it as infertility. I don't want anyone to have this disease. I want people to know about the symptoms before they show up. Infertility is one of those things that knowledge is power and everything that you learn is actionable. So many people are afraid. They feel like, well, maybe God didn't intend me to have kids, so maybe I should just wait and not see doctors. But what I tell patients is this, look, if your heart was hurting and you felt like you were having a heart attack, what would you do? Wouldn't you go to the doctor? Wouldn't you get an ultrasound of your heart? Well, it's the same thing when it comes to fertility. It's a medical diagnosis. It's actually considered a disease. It's one of the most common disease. And if you look at research articles, especially this year, what they say is that up to 25 million people in this country need treatment for infertility. So whatever I can do to bring that number down, whatever I can do to educate people everywhere about this painful and not so easy disease to talk about, we call that taboo. That's what I'm going to do each and every day until everyone knows about how you track your levels over time, how to protect your fertility. And if you understand the process of egg freezing, well, guess what? You just taught yourself basically how to take my job. So I want to get into a little bit about what we're going to talk about tonight. Like I said, track your fertility levels over time. You'll all be rappers just like me, Dreamy. We'll talk about the levels, FSH, estradiol, AMH. You're going to know exactly what those levels are, what they mean. By the end of tonight's show, we'll talk about the egg freezing process. I get a lot of questions. I've gathered lots of questions over the years by throwing these parties, and I'm going to share those questions and answers with you as well. And we'll also talk about how to protect your fertility. But the first thing is, who should consider egg freezing? You know, some people say, well, I'm too young and I don't want kids. Well, that would be maybe someone in their 20s or someone in their 30s where they're saying, I'm too busy and I'm not sure because maybe I'm approaching 35 and I heard that eggs aren't good at 35. Well, I would say that unless you get your levels checked, you don't really know if egg freezing is for you or not. And then women in their 40s, well, there actually are women in their 40s who could freeze their eggs and maybe consider multiple cycles so that they have a better chance in the future if they're not ready to use their eggs at that point in time. So anytime you have the question of, should I freeze my eggs and is it for me? Don't go off of articles you read online or information you might get from friends or your neighbors. Go see a fertility expert. We call ourselves reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialists. To get to that field, you go through an OBGYN residency. And then after that, you do a fellowship in infertility. REI docs, that's kind of what we describe ourselves as. So just a quick biology overview. So a lot of people are surprised that we're born with all the eggs that we'll ever have. I wish and I look for the day, I can't wait for the day until I can tell a patient, you've run out of eggs, but guess what? Don't worry, I have something for you. And I feel like, you know, with all the computer systems and amazing things that Jeff Bezos is doing, you know, being able to send people into space, you would think that humankind has figured out a way to help women regenerate eggs when they've run out at an age where many of us aren't done starting our family. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to educate everybody about fertility so that you will be empowered and this knowledge will hopefully help you so that you can plan the future fertility that you always wanted. So that number, the number that you're born with, is dependent and determined by a number of things. And a couple of those things would be your genetics and environmental exposure. I mean, one of the things I ask patients is when did your mom go through menopause? What about your sisters? Anyone in the family with a fertility-threatening disease, like, for example, endometriosis? So if you don't have someone that you feel like you can talk to, like your mom isn't necessarily talking to you about this kind of stuff, or you don't feel necessarily comfortable doing that, then there are tests that you can do. There's a fertility genetic test. It's called the Fertilome test. myfertilome.com is the website. And I ask my patients to consider it. But this is the thing. Before you consider a test like that, I also tell my patients to consider a pre-test counseling appointment. Because before you get a test done, you want to ask yourself, how is this test going to make me feel and what am I going to do with this information? Getting your fertility levels checked, getting these genetic tests done, it isn't like going to get your blood sugar level checked, right? So we all know that when you get your blood sugar level checked, it's a sign for a disease called diabetes. And we all know that most of the time diabetes can be treated with lifestyle changes like diet and exercise. So fertility is just not one of those things. We're used to, being taught from grade school, if you work really, really hard for something, you're going to get it. But fertility doesn't work out that way. So when you do a test, oftentimes, if you get results back that you didn't want, you may not be able to change the things if you're doing these tests too late. So like I said earlier, knowledge is power, the information is actionable, but it's really important that you get this information as early as possible so you have the options in the future that you want for yourself. The other thing about our ovaries and biology is you'll only ovulate one egg a month. So when you come into the office, and I'll show you a picture of an ultrasound shortly, one of the things that we do is called an AFC or antral follicle count. And that's an ultrasound looking at the number of follicles in your ovary. And so that number refers to the number of eggs that you could potentially ovulate in an egg retrieval cycle or an egg freeze cycle. So here's a couple things people think. When you look at eggs on an ultrasound, or you tell a patient let's just use the number 10, has the potential to ovulate 10 eggs a month, and then you go collect those 10, whether you collect them or not, you're going to lose those 10 eggs. So egg whisperers, meaning doctors like me, are also egg rescuers. So we send out little life vests to the eggs through medications and an egg harvesting procedure so that we can save those eggs from what we call apoptosis, or just regular old egg loss that happens every single month. But you don't go into menopause earlier, and that seems kind of strange, right? You would think that if someone's collecting your eggs, well, then you're going to run out of them faster, but that's not how it works, because those eggs would have, gone away anyways. So we talked about the rap song that I'm eventually going to have written for me about the AFC, the AMH, day 3, FSH, estradiol. But if you're going to ask for a test to track your fertility over time, that's exactly what you would ask for. So AFC is an ultrasound looking at your ovaries. And the reason why an ultrasound is really important is because it not only looks at your ovaries, but it looks for other things like maybe endometriosis. And you can see that as cysts called endometriomas in the ovaries. You can also look at the size, the shape of the uterus, and make an assessment about someone's lining, whether there are polyps or fibroids or other things that can affect implantation. So the AFC is really important also because FSH, estradiol, and AMH levels are not always as reliable as you would hope. They fluctuate over time. They can meander a little bit depending on, let's say, your vitamin D level or whether you're on birth control pills. So getting all this information together will give someone a really good idea as to what's going on with their fertility. So what you can see here on the screen is a picture of an ultrasound. So you can see the little black circles, so those are called follicles, and each black circle has a microscopic egg inside. So when you go through a cycle of egg freezing, we watch those follicles grow, and the size of the follicle is a reflection of the maturity of the egg inside. So we like follicles to get to 18 to 20 millimeters before we actually extract the eggs. So you can imagine that if someone has, let's say, 15 to 20 of those little ping pong balls, you're going to feel like you swallowed a watermelon. So going through an egg freeze or even IVF, and I say that often that egg freezing is just IVF without the F, going through that process is kind of like going from 0 to 4 months or 5 months of pregnancy in about 10 days. So before you go through the process, you want to make sure that you're well prepared for that bloating and that you've basically canceled all your beach vacations in that 2-week period, because that's not the time that you want to be laying out, because you're going to be very uncomfortable going to the beach like that. So the AMH is the other hormone level, and that's a level that is that's a hormone that's secreted by cells that surround the eggs. So as we get older, as you can imagine, totally normal for the level to drop. And by the time we've run out of eggs, that level is not detectable anymore. So that level also gives you an idea as to how many follicles you're going to get. It might also predict perhaps your pregnancy chances and maybe predict whether you're at higher risk of having a miscarriage or not. And that hormone could be checked at any time during the cycle. However, if you're on birth control pills, it might suppress the AMH, maybe even up to 50%. So before you have a major freak out over your levels, be sure, like I said earlier, to track them over time and see someone like me, an REI, or Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility specialist, so that we can really tell you the facts and the truth. Because if you go to Dr. Google, you might totally freak yourself out unnecessarily, and there's no reason to stress. Only get the information. I never consider things as good or bad. I just consider it as the ability, or it gives us the ability to learn about you so that you can make decisions and give yourself the options that you want for the future. So the FSH and estradiol, those are two hormones that if you just go to Google image and put in menstrual hormones hormones over the menstrual cycle, what you'll see is a really nice graph. How FSH and LH are really low in estradiol, and then they peak around ovulation, and then they come back down, okay? So the reason why this is important is I've had patients go to their doctors and they say, check my FSH and estradiol. And then guess what? The FSH comes back at over 40, and the estrogen level, it looks wonky too, and then they're told that they have menopause. Well, this is the thing. We look at the FSH estradiol between cycle days 1 through 4. That level gives us an idea as to how hard your ovaries are working to make eggs. So unlike AMH, where a high level is considered, let's say, high fertility, for the FSH, it's a lower level. And we don't just look at the FSH in isolation. We look at both hormones, FSH and estradiol, together. So, for example, if your FSH is over 10, well, it suggests your ovaries are working a little bit harder. If your FSH is over 13, it means they're working pretty hard to make an egg every month. Once your FSH goes above 20 to 40, at that point you're having more variability in your cycles, and over 40 you've stopped having your periods completely. So that level also kind of indicates what your egg viability is like. So the higher the FSH, the lower the chances of pregnancy, but it doesn't mean no chance for pregnancy. And for those of you out there who are watching this, some of you may have a higher FSH, and you may have heard the diagnosis DOR, or decreased ovarian reserve. And I don't like words like decrease because I'm a super positive person. I just like to think of things as there's a chance, there are eggs, what are my chances, what do I need to do, and let's consider being as aggressive as possible given the situation. So I want to talk a little bit about the process of egg freezing. If I go into an elevator, it is not unlikely or unusual for me to walk in and be like, how many people here know how to freeze eggs? And people look at me like, who is she and why is she wearing that t-shirt? Because I often wear this t-shirt around town. But the egg retrieval or egg freezing process, it isn't as complicated as people might think, but at the same time, there are risks to every medical procedure. So it's really important to talk to a medical expert and talk about what your concerns are so that your cycle is designed in a really personalized way. So the first thing you do is blood work, and then you take injections. And when I say injections, I'm going to show you what a needle looks like, but it's super small. It goes into the skin of your tummy, and you're going to do that self-administered for about 10 nights. But there are ways around things if you have, let's say, a severe needle phobia. I mean, I have some people that they just hear the word needle or look at a needle, they're going to pass out. Well, those are the patients that I say, come on into the office, come on in for about 10 days. And over that 10-day period of time, we're going to be doing ultrasounds, maybe 3 to 4, depending on how the ovaries look and how they're responding to medications before the egg retrieval. So that's basically what's involved, and that goes on for about 2 weeks. So you'll come to the office, we'll take a look, we'll make a calendar together, and then we'll do the shots in the skin of the tummy. We'll teach you how to do it, and it's a teeny tiny needle, not a big fat needle that a lot of people think is involved in IVF. So these are some pictures from a friend of mine, Nikki Goldstein. She wrote a book, Single But Dating, and I wrote the egg freezing section. So she shared some of these pictures with me as she was journaling her egg freezing process. And one of the things she was showing was how bloated she is. And it's one thing to feel bloated when you're not expecting it, but I tell patients, expect it so that you're not as surprised or worried once it happens. So the egg retrieval procedure occurs in an operating room setting, and so you'll meet really nice nurses. You'll have an IV placed, usually in your arm or in your wrist, and then we walk into the operating room together. And this is basically what an operating room looks like. You'll see here, actually I should point with my finger here, what you'll see is there's basically an operating room table, and there's an ultrasound machine right next door. So the egg retrieval is literally like an ultrasound while you're sleeping. And you wake right up afterwards, and I'll show you an example of how it looks as you're having it done, and you can see that we're all looking on the screen as the eggs are being retrieved. Most patients are asleep. My patients are almost always asleep for the procedure. So as far as a 3D graphic of what happens, what you'll see is there's a probe that goes inside, and a lot of people are like, how do you get those eggs? Are you cutting me open? Are you doing sutures? Like, how do you do it? And it's literally like the pelvic ultrasound that you'll have in the office to look at the antral follicle count. But instead, you're just taking a really thin needle and you're passing it through the wall of the vagina one time on each side, and then you're draining those circles that are nice and big, and you can see from here how they look, and then you go target each of those follicles and try and get as many eggs as you possibly can. And then you hand them over to the embryologist who sits under a hood, and then they're going to count out the eggs for us and tell us how they look. So the way an egg looks is this, and then what happens is after my clicker is very, very sensitive tonight. So once the egg is retrieved and it's frozen, well, I want to also teach you what happens from egg to embryo, not just frozen. So there is a process to get the eggs from egg to embryo, and that's called ICSI, and that's how you fertilize an egg. I know this is like the alphabet soup, and you're like, what is she saying? FSH, estradiol, AMH? But if you don't remember anything, just remember you can always go to my website, dramy.org, and all this stuff is basically there as well. So ICSI stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and once you're ready to use your eggs, you're going to make sure that you've learned everything there is about the sperm. You're going to put the sperm through a sperm fitness challenge. You can do extra genetic tests on the sperm cells. I have patients sometimes send their sperm for DNA testing, literally just taking a vial and shipping it off and getting it analyzed prior to using it for the eggs. And then what we do is, here's a picture of a fertilized egg, and then we watch the embryo go from egg all the way, let's see if I can do this, there we go, all the way to a hatching blastocyst. And if you want, you can also genetically test the embryo to find out if it's normal or not before you transfer it. So apparently my finger is very, very heavy tonight and I keep clicking through. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the things that people don't talk about when it comes to egg freezing. And I'm not surprised at all when my patients break down and cry who come in for egg freezing. I'm not. It's a really, really personal thing. And there's so many things I want patients to learn about before they go through the process. I even send patients to a counselor, right? It's not because I think my patients need to be evaluated to see if they're okay to do egg freezing. It's because I want them to make sure that they understand the emotional implications associated with going through the process. You hear a lot online or in the news about how people call egg freezing an insurance plan, and it's all about having it all. But I consider egg freezing a plan B, and even when you have a plan B, you still need a plan C, and you shouldn't rely just on your eggs. Your eggs are just a chance for pregnancy. Until that day where we have some sort of tool where we can re-energize eggs reliably or help a woman grow more when she's run out, your eggs are just a chance. So I don't want anyone to be given false hope about this process because as far as I know, we're all just human. We're not bunnies, we're not cats, we're not mice, we're just mammals. And mammals have a certain chance for pregnancy every cycle, and every egg has a percentage chance of viability. And that percentage chance of viability has everything to do with your age at the time that you froze your eggs. So some of the things to think about are, what are the legal implications of having eggs frozen if you're married or in a relationship? So you should find the answer out for yourself before you freeze your eggs. So the thing is that if you're married in a relationship, you're the owner of your eggs. It isn't until you've actually fertilized an egg then the ownership issues become a problem if there should be a relationship issue in the future. But what if something should happen to you? Have you, if you're going through an egg freezing process, thought about what would happen to your eggs? What if you're in a relationship? Have you talked to your partner about what you would want them to do with your eggs if, let's say, God forbid, something were to happen to you? And what if you're considering egg freezing and you're in a relationship? I mean, that's not unusual. I would say about 55% or more of my patients are in relationships when they're going through an egg freeze. But what if you tell your partner you don't necessarily get the reaction that you were hoping for? So those are the kinds of things I want people to think about before they go through the process. And what if that partner isn't supportive? And what if you actually go through the process and it turns out that your eggs weren't as viable as you had hoped for? You know, I try and support patients as much as possible with so many resources. But if you're not a patient of mine, these are really important things that I want you to think about before you go through egg freezing. So we talked a little bit about egg freezing giving women false hope. So it's important to talk to your doctor and say, look, how old am I? Okay, how many eggs do you expect from me? And what is the percentage chance of pregnancy you think I'm going to have with this set of eggs? And then you can make a really good decision about whether you're going to do this again and if that's enough for the family size that you want in the future. So the last thing I would want is for someone to thaw their future eggs and then find out they didn't work and to have, you know, to feel it's disappointing no matter what if your eggs don't work. But I don't want someone to be devastated because they weren't told that their eggs are not an insurance policy for them. Sometimes I'm in a unique situation to tell patients that maybe I'll get a very, very small number of eggs and the egg viability will be really low. And so I like to prepare patients for that possibility if I'm the first one to tell them that maybe their egg count is low. So that's really important before you go in to ask yourself, like, what would happen if I found that out? Well, I can tell you what I would do as a doctor is, depending on your age, I would still offer you that chance, because at the end of the day, it still just takes one egg, and I've definitely had patients where I've retrieved just one egg and they've gone on to have a future pregnancy even after I've just frozen one egg. I have many stories like that where a patient came to me, for example, and I literally froze one egg, and then she got pregnant a year later on her own without any help, not having to use her frozen egg for that first baby. And then what about having sufficient funds to undergo fertilization and embryo transfer when you're ready to do so? So going through an egg freeze isn't just about the cost of freezing the eggs. It's also the storage fee, as well as the cost of going from egg to embryo. And there's so many great companies out there that offer really helpful financing, and the financing terms are basically over a nice period of time. So, one of the things you heard me say earlier is I want everyone to know about egg freezing, the same number of people that know about getting their boobs done, right? And getting your boobs done is actually about the same cost as freezing your eggs. And over 100,000 women get their boobs done every year. So I should go talk to all the plastic surgeons out there, right? No, we're not going to do a 2-for-1 here. So over the past 3 years, I've done probably over 26 parties. 26 egg freezing parties. And I've learned a whole bunch of lessons, and I thought, you know what, there's no better place than here for me to share them with you. So one of the lessons I learned is that as more women are doing this, they're sort of talking about their numbers and comparing their numbers to one another, almost as if it's a competition. So what I just want to tell you is that, I've had patients who've had 3 eggs frozen and all 3 are genetically normal in the future. I've also had patients who've had 30 eggs frozen, and I'll just say 1 egg was normal out of 30. So it's not so much about the numbers, and this isn't a competition. It's more about just going through the process for you. And your egg count isn't your friend's egg count because your genetics just aren't the same as them. And the other thing is about FSH and AMH. So I've heard people say, Dr. Amy, I have the ovaries of a 25-year-old, and you're really 45. The thing is that your fertility is not skin deep. You can't put Botox in your ovaries. Your FSH levels fluctuate from 1 month to the next. So that's why I recommend tracking the level over time. So get your first levels checked at 25, and then depending on the levels, ask yourself, okay, what does my future hold for me? How many children do I want? And then think about, is egg freezing for me? Yes or no? And then depending on your situation, say, okay, I'm going to check my next set of levels maybe in 3 years. And if you're 30, maybe check your levels every year. If you're over 35, still every year. And then maybe do an egg freeze, I'll back up, by the time you're 32, depending on what your levels say. So that to me is a really good age to do an egg freeze. But there are some women who, if they wait until 32, they may not get as many viable eggs. So that's why checking your levels at 25 is key. So the lesson from this slide is that FSH can be falsely satisfying. So don't just rely on that alone. We look at the AMH and the antral follicle count and age. So just because you have really reassuring levels, and let's say you're over 40, your age is really important as far as how it can help us predict your future fertility. And then AMH always meanders. It always just goes a little bit up, a little bit down. It can be influenced by a number of things like your vitamin D level, whether you're on birth control pills. So before you, let's say, take your levels and say, I'm good, I don't have to do anything or worry, certainly I don't want you to worry, but that's why it's important to track your levels over time. So one of the first egg freezes I did, I think it was almost 10 years ago in my private practice. I was freezing eggs before that when I was in my training. One of the first patients, it took her a while to actually come around and do her egg freeze. So with this with this party that I'm actually throwing live this Friday night, I reached out to her and I said, you know what, tell me, how did you feel before you did egg freezing? And this is actually not uncommon for so many women to come in and feel like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe this is me. I just thought my life would be different. I can't believe I have to freeze my eggs. And that's exactly how this one patient felt about it, and she was crying with every visit, and I had to reassure her that she was actually quite awesome and that the decision that she was making to freeze her eggs was hopefully empowering, and it was just giving her options for the future. And so the great thing is that after she did it, she actually felt that it meant freedom and not failure. So egg freezing is an opportunity for you to learn so much about yourself, so much about your body, so much about something that's so important, and that is your fertility and future fertility. And doing it can oftentimes make you feel like you have a little bit more freedom than you otherwise would have had, okay? And then the other lesson is that more people knew about boob jobs, and I know I said that like 10 times, but I feel like if there's anything that will get people's attention, it's just me saying this over and over and over again. And the other interesting thing is I've gone to pharmaceutical companies who sell birth control pills, and no one's listening to me quite yet, but I feel maybe if I have like a few more YouTube subscribers on my show, so that's a plug to please subscribe to my YouTube Egg Whisperer channel, maybe some of these pharmaceutical companies will listen to me, okay? So imagine this, you're 16 years old, you're placed on birth control pills because your periods are irregular. Fast forward, you're now 32 years old, you just got married, you want to stop your birth control pills and start your family, and your periods don't start. You call your mom, you call your sister, you call your neighbor, and you're given the advice, well, it's because you're on birth control pills. Well, the thing is that it really isn't. If your periods stop after birth control pills, or they're really irregular, one of the possibilities is that the birth control pills was masking the fact that you were running out of eggs. And there's a percentage of women who actually run out of eggs in their 30s. So unless you were checking your levels from 16 to 30, you wouldn't know if that was happening to you. So we have a large proportion of the population who's taking birth control pills when they're the most fertile, and they have no way of knowing because they can't see the signs in their periods as to whether their eggs are running out. So one of the lessons I've learned is that women think that when they're having regular periods on their birth control pills, it means they're fertile. So basically, birth control pills are totally tricking women. And now that you watch this, you're not going to be tricked because you're going to get your levels checked and you're going to learn about your fertility, and you're going to be like, I'm so glad I tuned into that crazy egg whisperer lady telling everyone about fertility and boobs. Good. So the other thing is that we spend a lot of time getting Pap smears, right? I mean, we have these guidelines that say every woman should have a Pap smear by 21. And then in your 30s, if you're in a mutually monogamous relationship, you should have Pap smears every 3 years. So we spend so much time at the doctors. We spend so much time, especially when we're the most fertile, talking about how not to get pregnant. But there's an opportunity now for us to change the conversation. And that's what I want to do and say, look, if you're spending that time in the doctor's office, if you're not going to go through the, let's say, eggwhisperer.com website, don't worry, that's okay. I just want to educate you. So you can go to your OBGYN, your primary care doctor, and say, hey, can you do an egg check for me? Can you check my FSH estradiol on cycle days 1 through 4 and my AMH? And if they can't help counsel you on what they mean, you can call me, and I'm happy to help you and tell you what your levels mean for you. So there should be no reason why a woman comes to me anymore at age 40 and says, I didn't know. I had no idea there was a test for this. So that's the goal, is that everyone is just aware about what these levels are, what they mean, how you follow them over time, and how they can predict your future fertility and your egg stores and counts and what you can do about them depending on what you learn. So the other lesson I've learned is that people don't realize how important the sperm factor is, right? So to get pregnant, it basically takes 3 things: sperm, eggs, and fallopian tubes that are open, okay? So the fallopian tube is the embryo transport system. The embryo takes that frozen egg and a sperm cell. You get one chance to thaw those precious eggs. So I said it before, I'm gonna say it again. Be sure to learn some of the lessons that I've learned at all these parties with the stories that women all over the country have shared with me, that when it comes to thawing your eggs, make sure you've put the sperm through sperm fitness challenges. So I'm going to close out tonight by talking about how you can protect your fertility. I was quoted in a really fun article this week. You can see it. I posted it on the Facebook Live chat about your personal lubrication. Yes, my mother's watching. I think she might be blushing right now. And how some of the products aren't so natural. So that just brings up your environment. So the products you're using, the products you're exposing yourself to. So just pay careful attention to what you're using. There are great websites out there to look at your products, your beauty products, to make sure that they don't have things like, let's say, parabens, for example, that can potentially affect your future fertility. So egg killers and sperm killers are cigarettes. They're bad for you. Women who, let's say, smoke can go through menopause earlier. So before you pick up that cigarette, be sure to check your levels. No, I'm just kidding. don't pick up the cigarette. The other thing that you can do to protect your fertility is make sure to always use a condom, because we know that STDs can block fallopian tubes. And if that happens, then you definitely need to do IVF for your family, because if your tubes are blocked, there's really no way to repair them for future pregnancy. You would think that we could do something like a fallopian tube transplant, but we're just not there yet. So I want everyone to go to the eggwhisperer.com website if you don't have a doctor in your area or someone who would check your levels, or just use it as a way of getting information. If you've had your levels checked and you just want my thoughts on them, we can do a quick consult. You can also call into the show live. We're here every Wednesday at 5 p.m. We also have a podcast if you missed a show and just want to listen to it on the way to work or wherever you're going. That's also a possibility. So I'm just going to look here down at the chat and see if we have any questions tonight. And it looks like everyone is just doing great watching the show tonight. So I just wanted to say a thank you to everyone. If you're in the Bay Area, I'm doing a live egg freezing party Friday night at Epic Steakhouse in San Francisco. So if you're available and you want to come, please join the party. You can sign up at eggfreezingparty.com. And I hope you learned a lot about fertility, how to track your levels over time, a little bit about how to protect your fertility as well tonight. And I hope you have a great night, and join us next Wednesday on the next Egg Whisperer show. Have a great night.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abatzadeh.
And you have yet another success story.
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard